Good evening, everybody, and welcome to GlugNet. My name is Stephen Ball. I'm the president. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Rob Richardson, who is going to be speaking to us about .NET Aspire, your DevOps companion. Before we get started, though, a little bit about our organization. We are the Greater Lansing user group for .NET developers, based out of Okemos, Michigan. Our meetings are free and open to the public and held every month on the third Thursday. The best way to find out more information about us and to learn what we have coming up is to go to our meetup site, meetup.com/glugnet. Typically, our meetups are recorded and posted to YouTube by our own Sam Nasser. You can get to his channel either by the QR code here on the screen or by going to youtube.com/@SamNasserMVP. A few housekeeping items before we get started tonight. Joe Kunk and I are always looking for lightning talks before our main presentation. So if you or somebody you know has a 10 to 15 minute talk on a technical topic and are interested, we would love to hear from you. Please let us know, and we will be happy to find a spot for you. Tonight's presentation is intended to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions of our speaker or answer any questions he asks us. If you are uncomfortable or are unable to speak up in that regard, we do have a chat feature within GoTo. We will be monitoring for questions in there as well. But we do ask that you please stay muted during tonight's presentation if you are not talking, just so that everyone can hear and enjoy the presentation. At the conclusion of tonight's presentation, a survey will be made available to all attendees. That survey has 6 questions. All feedback we receive is completely anonymous. In particular, we're looking for feedback in 2 different areas. First of all, how well are we promoting the events? Where did you hear it? That sort of thing. The second part is more about Rob and his presentation. What did you like? What didn't you like? All that feedback gets collected, summarized, and sent to Rob so he can improve his presentation for the future. So we would be very appreciative if you took 5 minutes after tonight's presentation and left your feedback. I will leave that open for 24 hours, so it'll close tomorrow night about 8 p.m. Eastern time. So if you do want to have a little time to percolate on it, you certainly can do so.
And I'm really looking forward to your feedback. So yeah, definitely fill out the form, and I'd love to learn.
Our sponsors for this evening: NIS Technologies, who's providing this go-to session, and the .NET Foundation for their financial support of GlugNet. So now, as they say, it is time for our feature presentation.
I'm really excited that we get to talk about .NET Aspire. .NET Aspire is a really good way to be able to visualize your applications, but also fall into the pit of success with web technologies. It is really, really cool. Here's the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. But I've already done that. You can head over to robrich.org. Let's go there, robrich.org. Click on presentations here at the top, and here is .NET Aspire, your DevOps companion at GlugNet. You can get to the slides and you can get to the code. It's all online right now. Oh, and it got updated to .NET Aspire 9.1, so I'm really excited about showing off the .NET Aspire 9.1 features tonight. I was also on .NET Rocks recently, which was really fun. While we're here on robrich.org, let's click on About Me and see some of the things that I've done recently. I used to live in Michigan. I now live a little bit further southwest. I'm now in Utah, but I'm a Microsoft MVP at MCT and a Docker captain. I've done some things with Redgate and Cypress and other places. One of the things I'm really proud of, AZ Give Camp. AZ Give Camp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver completed software to charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ Give Camp. Or if you'd like a Give Camp here in Lansing or wherever you're watching from, hit me up on any of the socials or find me here at the user group, and let's get a Give Camp in your neighborhood too. I've also gotten to work on some books, Pro Microservices in .NET 6. We're actually working on a Pro Microservices in .NET 10 now, and that's going to be really fun. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woo! So there's my claim to fame, my coveted .NET Rocks mug. And if you'd like a .NET Rock, they actually don't give them out anymore. .NET Rocks is awesome. So let's talk about .NET Aspire. We talked about this guy. Here's a .NET Aspire project, and I'm just going to launch it, and let's take a wander through it. In this .NET Aspire project, we have a backend API, we have a front-end Razor Pages website, we also have a Postgres database, we also are generating some random data. We've kind of got a lot going on here, which is pretty cool. And I'm going to launch it. You notice that I just have my app host as my startup project. And so it's going to do all of the things to be able to launch all of those microservices together. My machine's doing a whole lot with GoTo running, and also I've got Docker running. And so, yeah, it's going to spend a minute building. But we've got now our app almost ready to go. There we go. Let's launch our app. Almost there. There we go. Now, .NET Aspire is a great way to compose microservices as you're building for the web. It allows you to be able to discover microservices and to service discovery between services, but also allow
You're on mute, Rob.
Yeah, Rob, we lost your audio there for a moment.
Is my audio back now?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you for pulling me aside, because that would have been bad. So we've got a Postgres database. We've got our Redis cache. We've got a backend API, and we can fire up that backend API. Wow, GoTo's really dogging my box. And this may be a very different demo. And we also have a front-end website. It's trying. Okay, here we go. Here's our front-end website. It looks a lot like a Blazor app, but it's actually a Razor Pages app. I can come in and get some weather forecasts, and it will actually make API calls into my backend here. But then we can also come here to weather stations, and this will actually do a query into the Postgres database. Yep, there we go. We've got some weather stations here. And the cool part is that this is actually cached on the client for 1 second and cached on the server for 3 seconds. So we can see that we've got some really cool things. That caching happens here in Redis. We also have Postgres Web so that we can log into our database. But we also have this web front end written in Vue. We could have written it in React as well. And this is actually querying that same back end. So, the server caches for 3 seconds, and so we'll get that, but we also get our weather stations here. And for good measure, I guess I'm not starting the Python version here. So we've kind of got a lot going on. a lot of different services, and we all started them in one place just by launching .NET Aspire. As part of this dashboard, we also get the logs for this. Here's the logs for our backend API. We also get the logs for our front end. We can see when we do it. We can also get at structured logs where it starts to infer the details, and we can launch each one and kind of learn about the particulars of that logged entry. But what's really cool about this dashboard is traces. So we can see here's a view. The view app is trying to load it. It does a web request, and the API service is going to go get a weather forecast and then cache it in Redis. We can look at other traces. Let's look at this one. View made a request. The weather forecast noticed that it had a cache miss, and so it built some, and then it saved it to the cache. And so we can see that content. Scrolling up, we can see our web front end. In this case, it just used a local cache, so it didn't need to go farther. This one actually had a cache miss, and so it reached out into the API. The API also had a cache miss, so it generated some, and then it cached that. And then ultimately, when the web front end got its result, it cached that result too. And so we just have a really cool way of being able to visualize this. If we take a look at each of these, we can see, for example, this was an HTTP GET, and we got a 200, and here's the URL that we went to, and here's the various details about that service, and we can get details associated with that. In this case, those are empty. So we've got a lot. Switching over to the logs, we can then go find the logs associated with that request. We've got a lot here in the Aspire dashboard. I love that it launched all of the things. We could also choose to stop it or restart it here as well. There's a lot going on in this dashboard. So that was really cool, the .NET Aspire demo. We're going to build up to exactly what we saw here, but it was kind of fun to see where we're going to go. Any questions, any thoughts on .NET Aspire so far? Excellent. So .NET Aspire, what is it? It's an opinionated framework for development and deployment of web applications. So it brings the best of .NET and web standards into a thing that just makes it easy to fall into the pit of success. It's a great answer to the question, how do you build a suite of cloud-native microservices that's observable and easy to deploy? That's kind of their mission, and I think they were able to solve it in a really elegant way. It isn't a new .NET, it's just a mechanism for being able to launch a bunch of web services at once. The existing .NET things aren't going away anytime soon, but we'll see how you can add this to both new and existing projects. So it brings together a lot of .NET technologies and web technologies into a really well-paved path. There's lots of tech around doing, for example, logging and metrics, and there's a lot of things for launching multiple microservices and connecting them together, but .NET Aspire just kind of brings all of that together into a very, very well-paved path. So we saw a bit of this as we launched the demo. We can start all of the microservices together. We get sensible defaults on all of our projects. We get OpenTelemetry, logs, traces, and metrics out of the box. We have an easy DevOps in a very opinionated way. And we have low config components in an opinionated way as well. And so each of these pieces, we can choose to leverage them or set them aside. And so you don't have to take all or nothing. It's a great mechanism to be able to start to dig into these pieces. So you can use as much or as little as you want. And that's really cool. Do you like that dashboard? Or would you can actually even use that dashboard as an OpenTelemetry visualizer for other projects. And we'll see that today too. But if you have opinions around deployment or connecting services together, and you've already kind of solved that path, then maybe you set those pieces of .NET Aspire aside and just use the pieces that you like. So let's take a look at that project that we saw and see the pieces that we've got in here. So we have our API service. That's our backend. And our backend just connects to Postgres and to Redis, and then has these APIs that we've got, and the APIs where we just have a weather forecast getter, and we have a reach into entity framework to get data out of the database. And so that backend API is quite sweet. Here in the API, we can see that we're choosing to cache the request for 3 seconds. And because we rigged up our caching here, then it caches that out to Redis. Now, one thing that's interesting is we have a Redis cache to cache, and we have a database context to PostgreSDB, but we don't have any app settings. They're just blank. .NET Aspire makes this happen automatically with really cool components. Now, our front end is similar. Here's our front end, and so we'll rig up our cache. We'll rig up our reference to our API service, and notice that it's just API service. Similar thing in app settings. We don't have anything referencing how we connect to that service. We just reference API service. We then rig up Razor pages, and so here's those Razor pages where we have our counter component that actually isn't used, and we have our weather forecast that just outputs all of those. We have our weather stations, and each of these then just goes into that weather API and goes and collects that data. So here's our weather API, and it's just going to make a call out to that API and deserialize that content into the proper format. In this section, we also have tests. And these tests do interesting things. We'll kind of gloss over that. Let's look at service defaults. Now, as part of .NET Aspire, we get these great service defaults, but unlike kind of magic components where they hide the things away from us, in this case, they show us all of the particulars here. We can take a look at how they rig up OpenTelemetry, and if we don't like that, we can not rig up OpenTelemetry, and that's completely fine. Now, as they rig up OpenTelemetry, they're going to rig up logging. They'll also rig up metrics and tracing. And we can actually add some more tracing components. Like by default, we add HTTP client, but I've also added entity framework and Redis so that we can see those queries as well in our tracing logs. And the cool part is that OpenTelemetry exporters is only set up if we have an OTel exporter OTLP endpoint environment variable set up. If we don't, then it won't rig up OpenTelemetry any more than it will collect it for the purpose of debugging. We have health checks turned on. We have some health check details here, and all of that is rigged up by default. As we add .NET Aspire to a project, we just get this add service defaults, which gives us this other project of nice details in there. And then the really cool part here is this app host. Now the app host is able to start up all of these microservices, create those connections together with them, and this app host is a C# file. You know, if we were doing this in Docker Compose, we might do it in a YAML file, and we could definitely do that. But here we can do some interesting things. Let's go create a username and password, and it's actually stored in the app settings for this project. It's actually off in the user secrets for this project. And so we'll add Postgres. We'll use the Alpine image of that Postgres container. We'll build a database. We'll run this. We'll save the data off in a cool place. We'll start the Postgres admin tool. We'll build a database here in Postgres, and we'll spin up Redis using the Alpine image for Redis as well. And then we'll rig up all of our services. So here's our API service with a reference to the cache and a reference to Postgres. These won't start until Postgres and the cache are running. Then we'll launch our front end with a reference to the cache and the API service. that will also wait for the API service to run before it starts. We'll also start our View app, and we've got all of the pieces launched. Now this View app is just an NPM thing, so we say, hey, I'm just going to happen to call it View. It's in this folder, and when you run it, say npm run dev. It'll set that environment variable, the port environment variable. So we saw, oh, it's not running anymore. We saw that it was running on another port. So here inside View, we can see that we've just, not there, we listen for that port environment variable and just connect in all of the OpenTelemetry details as well. So that was really cool getting to walk through that demo project. Let's see how we might get started with this. Yeah, that was quite a lot in one solution, but how might we build a new solution? So I'm going to create a new project, and I'll put it here inside this Greenfield folder. In this Greenfield folder, oh, here we go, .NET Aspire Starter app. So in the GitHub repository, in most cases, I have a start and a done folder. So in this case, we're creating a Greenfield app, so there is no start. But then here's the results of what we'll build. And so you can compare that with what you're doing. In the next sample, we'll see that as well, where we have a start and a done. So let's build a new .NET Aspire app. We'll put it in here. We'll call it Aspire Greenfield. And now it's going to ask us some options. I'm going to choose .NET 9. I could also choose .NET 8. I want to use Redis caching. I'll create a test project, and then I'll build it. And now it's going to spin up the
That's your audio again, Rob.
Thank you for flagging me down. Have I got audio now?
Yep, you're good now. Okay.
Yeah, bandwidth, I'm sure. So we can see the really cool part about this app is this app host. And here in this app host, is where it launches it. So it's going to launch the API service. It's going to launch the front end. Apparently the caching is only on the front end here. And then it rigs up that relation to the API service. And so as we launch this project, we're launching the app host as our starter project, and it will then go launch our API service. It will, oh, actually, let me build, cancel. Let's add this dot with image tag Alpine, and that'll use our lighter weight Redis. There we go. And so now it's going to start, as we start the app host, it will launch Redis. It will also launch our API, and it will also launch our front end. And wouldn't it be hilarious if I lost audio again? Ooh, efficiency mode. Yeah, I would love to go poke at efficiency mode in the task manager. I love that. Yeah, GoTo is really dogging my box. Okay, here we've got this starter project ready to go. Now it just launches a single console. When we started without .NET Aspire, we'd get a console for this and a console for that, and I love how the dashboard just brings it all together into one spot. We'll launch this and authenticate into that Aspire dashboard. And here we go. It'll start out by starting the cache. The cached container is starting up. It is running. Our API service is running as well. Here's the Swagger for that. Nope. And then our front end where we can launch this and do all the things. Ooh, good idea. Is that efficiency mode in GoTo better? Cool. So now here's our weather station, our weather forecast, and it is cached on the client for 3 seconds, I think. And so as we reload, we don't get new temperatures until we do. Maybe it's cached for 5 seconds. There we go. Back in our dashboard, we can see the traces. And so we can see that I did a whole lot of this refreshing on the web front end, but it didn't need to call out into the API. But when we do, it's fun to be able to see all of those calls across all of the pieces. We get our console logs in both projects. We also get our console logs from Redis. And in this case, Redis is talking about all of the calls that it's making. And so that is a greenfield application. Any questions or concerns, thoughts on creating a brand new .NET Aspire app?
Pretty cool how easy you can just wire up stuff, and get it working. So that's cool.
Yeah. So we saw some interesting things when we did that starter project. We saw .NET Aspire components. Now, I didn't have any connection strings. I just said, I want Redis. And so it used that name inside of the app host project to inject it into the other project to automatically wire up this thing. Now, on the upside, these AutoMagic components, these Aspire components, are great to be able to get started with technologies. Like I said, I don't know what Redis is, just give me a Redis. I don't know what Postgres is, just give me a Postgres. So those are really cool, but they're also a bit magic. And so if you were to Google how to wire up Redis in .NET, you wouldn't get this. You would get regular stuff. So should you use .NET Aspire components? It might be worth doing the work to do it the regular way instead. If you like their defaults and you like the AutoMagic wiring, and probably if you're using .NET Aspire deployment as well, then it can be perfect. So let's upgrade an existing project. So now I'm going to open the .NET Aspire Brownfield project. And so there's a start and a done. The start is before we begin, and we see there's only 2 projects. When we're done, we'll see that there are 4 projects. And so you can pop open those in GitHub and compare and contrast. Oh, and I did not reset my demo. So let's go do that. Remove. Oh, actually, I bet I opened the done project, not the start project. Let me try this again. Open a project. Brownfield start. Yeah, there we go. That looks better. Okay, so we have this API service. We have a link to Redis using our normal details. It has a connection string to Redis. We have that connection string here in app settings. Well, actually, we have it here. Well, actually, we have it in user secrets. And so there's our connection to Redis, but also our connection to the API. So there's Redis, and it does all the things. And then here in our front end, we see we go read that app settings weather API, and we know how to link into our API. We're actually using Redis here as well. So this one, in this project, I'll open it up in VS Code. We can see that we have this Docker Compose file that allows us to be able to start up Redis in a really elegant way. But we kind of need to Docker Compose up, and then we come into Visual Studio, and then there's kind of a lot going on here. So let's add .NET Aspire to this. I'm going to say add, oh, not on the solution, on one of the projects, add .NET Aspire Orchestrator support. Excellent. And so it's going to say what's my name prefix, and that one looks good. It will then add this service defaults project and this app host project that allows me to be able to launch that project in a really elegant way. And I love this overview page where it says, I actually spent about a week reading all of these. Here's some articles about this, and here's some articles about this. And it was just really cool to get familiar with Aspire this way. Now, one of the things that it did is build up this API, this Aspire dashboard, and we'll come back to this because we probably want to do a little bit more. But we've got that API service ready to go. And one thing that it did is it added this add service defaults to the very beginning. It also, here in the map default endpoints, it added this one as well. And so those two pieces kind of came in to be able to rig up into this service defaults project. Now in the service defaults project, we have OpenTelemetry, health check, service discovery, HTTP client defaults, a retry policy. All of those are now exposed to us. And if we have different opinions on any of these, we can just jump in and do it. So let's do that as well to this project. Now we don't have any references to the service defaults project yet. So let's right click and let's say add .NET Aspire Orchestrator support. And it says, oh, hey, there's already a project in the solution that uses .NET Aspire. Can I just use that? Why, yes. And so now we see that it's going to add this add service defaults, and it's also going to add this map default endpoints, and we're now rigged up into this project. It also added the details into the app host. So I'm going to do it like this, and I'm going to say var web equals builder.add project. Now we also need to add Redis. So let's come in here to app host, and let's say add .NET Aspire package. And what's interesting about this, these are those components. It just puts some pre-filter tags inside of the regular NuGet dialog. So I want Redis. Here's Redis. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to install it. And now that gives me the details that I need to be able to start a Redis container running on my machine. Yep, I've got Docker desktop, but I could also use Podman for this. So now that I have that component in here, let's say var Redis. Oh, I'm going to say var cache equals builder.add project. GitHub Copilot knows where I'm going. And I'm going to say this is actually not a project, but rather add Redis. And I'm going to call it cache. And I'll also say with image tag Alpine, just so that I'm using the lighter weight container there. Now I do want to rig this up with reference to the cache, but in my project, I didn't call it cache, I called it Redis. So back here in my app host, I'm going to say, I would like you to call it Redis when you inject that environment variable into place, please. And so now it's got this. I can also say dot wait for cache, and then it'll make sure that this container is running before it starts this project. Excellent. Now with my web, I also want to say with reference to the cache, and I'll call this Redis. That's what I chose to call it. But I'm also going to say with reference to my API service. Now, the cool part is here we said that I would like that connection string to be called Redis, please. But here, we don't really have the ability to say, I would like you to set this to be app settings weather API URL. It's going to pass in something different. And what it's going to pass in is services, API service, and it's API service because that's what I chose to call it right here. API service, I want the HTTPS port, please, and I would like the first one. And so, yeah, I did need to change my code a little bit to follow the Aspire conventions here, but that was a small sacrifice there. If I wanted to, I could say, and if you don't have an HTTPS one, can I have an HTTP one? And if you don't have that one, maybe I can do it the old way where I say app settings API service URL. Oh, weather API URL. Not there. And so maybe I'm falling back through the various ways. If I've got .NET Aspire running, go grab that. If I don't, then go grab it the old way. I did need to change my code a little bit, but because I had already kind of solved those conventions, the majority of what I did here was here in this app host, where I said, I would just like you to follow the conventions that I already have. So now we don't need to fire up this Docker Compose YAML file anymore. We already did that here inside Visual Studio. We said launch the cache, please. And so let's start this project. And I bet my audio is going to ditch out for a second. And let's start up this brownfield project now with all of these pieces in place. Okay, I cheated a little bit. My brownfield project was the Aspire Starter project so that we didn't have to learn a new project and the business logic associated with it. But the principles are the same. The majority of the time when you add .NET Aspire to a brownfield project, you don't need to change your code other than maybe a few configuration details. I need to update some NuGet packages. Let's come in here, manage NuGet packages. Do I have an outdated .NET Aspire? I do. Let's update these. .NET Aspire 9.1 just came out, and so it looks like I updated most of my projects, but not this one. And that's totally fine. Now that we've got the projects updated, let's launch our app. Oh, it's having fun telling me that I need to update all the things it just updated. That's hilarious. There we go. Now we're launching our project. We didn't need to start Docker Compose because we're launching the container through .NET Aspire. Okay, so that's a fail. I'll take that one offline and figure out why the NuGet package didn't get it done. Update. Actually, I'm going to try it one more time. Refresh. Save all. This demo is cool just because we get to see an upgraded project. This looks a little better. There we go. Yeah, I just needed to be more patient with updating my NuGet packages. And now we've got all of our things running. I didn't choose to wait for the API service and the cache when I was doing my website, which is why my website is already up. But now we can fire up that. Now, I didn't need to go pick ports either. It just randomly generated some ports to me, and it injected those into all of my things. So here's that service. Looks like it's having some CSS issues. But I can, oh, there we go. Here's my weather forecast. And so if we look at the configuration for this project, we can see that it got injected into it the ASP.NET Core environment variables, the Redis connection string. Here's that Redis connection string. And we got the ASP.NET Core URLs, so that's how it knew what port to launch on. We've also got all the OpenTelemetry settings that got injected into place. And here's the services environment variables that allows us to be able to connect from our front end to our back end on whatever port it chose to launch our back end. So here's our back end, and similar thing. We have the ASP.NET Core URLs where it said, I would like you to pick that port. So it just randomly generated some ports and allowed us to be able to do that. And so if we use, we can add a .NET Aspire project to an existing solution, and it can be a great way to be able to collect all those logs, to launch all of the projects in one go. We no longer need to worry about this set configure startup projects dialog, which is just a whole big mess. It's a thing. And so it's nice to be able to not have to worry about that either. So that was really cool. We got to see both a new project, but also updating an existing project. Any thoughts or concerns, questions on adding new .NET Aspire to an existing project?
Neat to see. I didn't know for sure he could do it. So that's nice to see that you can wire up to existing stuff. That's cool.
Yeah. So let's upgrade again and talk about deployment. Now, their very well paved path, their example implementation deploys to Azure Container Apps. But .NET Aspire very specifically does not make any opinions on your deployment. You could also deploy to Kubernetes, to AWS, to GCP, or you could just say, I don't want to use .NET Aspire to deploy. I've already figured out my deployment story. So doing .NET Aspire deployment, in .NET Aspire, it kind of has some opinions on how it rigs up the environment variables. We saw all the OpenTelemetry environment variables that are very well standardized across all of the different frameworks and tools. .NET, we saw it in Node, it's the same in Python, and I've rigged up Nginx with these environment variables, and those are very standard. But that mechanism of how it injected one service relating to another, that was kind of a weird syntax. And if we use .NET Aspire deployment, we need to use that syntax as well. So the cool part is if we use .NET Aspire to deploy, it will actually deploy with industry best practices. So for example, it will put our connection strings in Azure Key Vault, and it will rig up all of those dependencies, all of the kind of interesting automagic things it does in deployment as well. But if we're using non.NET projects, we actually have to do some interesting hacks inside of MS Build, which is just weird. Like if I wanted to deploy that Node project, the front end Vue project, I would have to do an npm install inside of MS Build to be able to get .NET Aspire to deploy that Vue project. That's just weird. So deployment to Azure Container Apps. This is the very well-paved path. And the cool part is it will, if we use .NET Aspire to deploy it, it will use industry best practices. It builds some bicep behind the scenes to be able to deploy our services. In this case, we're using Redis, so it would spin up an Azure cache for Redis. It would put our connection strings in Azure Key Vault. If we didn't choose to expose all of our services publicly, it would put them inside of a private network. And all of that is just auto-magically done, which is really cool. You can do it either from Visual Studio, where you could just right-click Publish from here and say, I would like to just publish this to Azure Container Apps, or you can run it inside of a DevOps pipeline as well. Now, it does deploy the .NET Aspire dashboard. We'll come back to why that's probably not a good idea. Outside of that, you might choose to use the Aspire project, which deploys to Kubernetes. Now, you can use Aspire in one of two ways. You can have it automatically deploy to Kubernetes, which is great. It will use all of those automagic pieces. Or you can have it scaffold YAML files and then do the deployment yourself. On the upside, it scaffolds the deployments and the services, which is great, but it doesn't scaffold out config maps and secrets and any of the other dependencies. So it would not, for example, scaffold out Redis and how to connect my apps into Redis. So you would need to do all of those pieces yourself. But the cool part is now you have a great path to get .NET Aspire apps into Kubernetes as well. And you can either do the automagic way or do the manual deploy way, and then take more control over it to be able to represent those resources however you want to. On the upside, so you could use the automagic, but you could also handcraft your Kubernetes YAML files, not using Aspire at all, and that would get you to Kubernetes as well. On the upside, it's really cool because now you have full control over your deployment. On the downside, you have to make sure that you follow the .NET Aspire conventions, like that services __ API service __ HTTPS __ 0. Like that has to be the name of the environment variable that you pass in. It can get a little bit weird. Or alternatively, let's come back to that one. In all of these scenarios, whether we're using Aspire or going to Azure Container Apps, it will deploy the .NET Aspire dashboard. Now, the .NET Aspire dashboard is really cool at collecting all of the details about your application, but it has no durable storage. You can use plugins to be able to get it durable storage, but for the most part, it's not going to keep track of what happened, say, yesterday. Instead, we probably want to take these logs and send them to Prometheus or Grafana, send them to Jaeger, the traces, to be able to get a more full-featured dashboard here. And the downside is if you're using the automagic deployments, either Azure Container Apps or any other place, you're going to get that .NET Aspire dashboard. You can't turn that off. It's not exposed publicly by default, which is very good. But if we chose to expose it publicly, all of the particulars of our application, all of the configuration details, all of the secrets are now readily available for anyone who stumbles on this dashboard. I would advise you, if you're going to deploy a .NET Aspire dashboard, to either then quickly disable the .NET Aspire dashboard or find a way to just not deploy it at all. Which leads me into the next thing. So yes, please don't deploy the .NET Aspire dashboard into your cloud environment. Instead, use Prometheus and Jaeger instead, or Azure Apps Insights or New Relic or Splunk or wherever you're logging today. You can also just not use .NET Aspire deployment and just say, I've already solved the deployment piece. Maybe I'm using GitHub Actions to deploy these things. I'm going to make sure that I follow the conventions of the environment variables, but you can take or leave as much of .NET Aspire as you want. So maybe you just don't deploy with .NET Aspire. You deploy with something else instead. Any concerns or thoughts on deploying in .NET Aspire? I love how the slides are web-based. Yes, Zoe, I agree. I hate it when people will export them to PDF and now I have to pinch and zoom around my phone, or they upload a PowerPoint. Now I have to go download the PowerPoint viewer to be able to view them. Yeah, they're web pages. So let's talk about now using .NET Aspire's dashboard as a standalone OpenTelemetry sync. So this is the fourth demo here. And here in this fourth demo, let's launch it in VS Code. Let me close Visual Studio. I have now this project. Now I'm going to start out by just launching the .NET Aspire dashboard. Now I'm running it as a container, and so I'll launch it on port 8000. I'm going to turn off authentication just because I don't want to have to deal with that. And I'll also allow cores from other places. Next, I'm going to launch Postgres, and I'm going to launch the Postgres admin tool. I'll launch Redis and the Redis admin tool. And so I've kind of got all of those pieces that I need to be able to launch stuff. So let's do that. Let's Docker Compose up. And now we'll start the dashboard, the .NET Aspire dashboard, and we'll also start our two data stores and their admin tools. Next, excellent. So our .NET Aspire dashboard is running. It's listening on port 8000. And so let's go to localhost 8000. And we can see that here's the .NET Aspire dashboard without a .NET project. Now, we used to have this tab here at the top that was able to discover all the services. It would go look in our app host for what services we have. And in this case, we don't have that. It's an OpenTelemetry sync, but it doesn't know where our services are. So we can't know that. We just have to know where those services are. So for example, let's go to localhost 8081. And we can get to our Postgres admin tool. So now, next, let's launch this ASP.NET project. Now, we're going to also launch some other projects as well. But here in this project, I just wanted to launch things into the dashboard so that we can be able to see the content, the OpenTelemetry details. Now, in this case, I have my API service. I have, instead of my front end, I have a load test tool. And so my API service is doing what it does, go reach into Redis, go reach into Postgres. I'm doing it the regular way with app settings. I added my OpenTelemetry details myself. We're not using the .NET Aspire pieces here. And then here in my load test, I'm just going to have this background service that every 2 seconds will go get the forecast and get the stations so that we can just kind of validate that the service is working. Similar thing is reaching into the app settings to go get those details. And so we'll just launch that. So if I launch this service, it has all of the details here in launch settings of how it's injecting all of the OpenTelemetry details about my dashboard into place in my services. So this is what .NET Aspire app host was doing for me, and now I'm doing it myself. So I am using the multiple startup projects again, so we'll get 2 terminals. I'm not super thrilled with that, but I get it. Here's the one terminal and the other terminal. But because we're using OpenTelemetry in both projects, if we come back to our dashboard, we can now see that we get the details associated with that. Oh, they haven't started yet. That's okay. It failed because my service hasn't started. There we go. There's my service. And so now we can see our service and we can wander through it. But we also have this load test tool that is hitting that service every 2 seconds as well. So now that it's doing that details, we can see that that service worked. Let's come back to our dashboard and we can see that we have those traces. Here's the console. It's going to go hit my API service. It got a cache miss. So it did the thing and then cached it. Then it hit the other service and cached that. And so we can see all of the different details associated with that request. We also have our structured logs and we have the metrics as well, which, oops, I didn't look at that previously. So we've got our .NET project going, but we also here in this solution, we have our View app. Now this is the View app that we saw previously. Let's launch that View app and we'll come in here. And so we'll rig it up to talk to our ASP.NET server. And so let's go there. And here's our .NET app, our Vue app rather. And yep, the backend is caching for 3 seconds. And then, but we also in this project have OpenTelemetry details going to our dashboard as well. Now it is failing to do the logs. I've got an open issue there, but we can see that if we come back to our traces, we have our Vue app. Now here's our Vue app hitting the API, and the API got a cache miss, and so it generated a new one and then saved that, and we can see all of the details associated with the traces in our Vue app. Here's our console load test, and it got a cache miss there, a cache hit there, or actually that's going off to our database, and so we can see all of the details there. In our project, we also have this Python app. So let's stop the .NET app, and let's start up our Python app. I think I just killed my terminal. So this may take a minute to start those back up. Docker container list. Yep, those are still running. That's good. We'll set, actually, we'll come back to the Vue one. Let's go to Python. Now we have this fast API. Let me start off by activating the virtual environment and then start.ps1. Oh, there we go. Start.ps1. And now this will launch a Python API. Now the cool thing about this Python API, let's come into start.sh. It just sets all those OpenTelemetry details and then launches it on port 8001. Now it does return the terminal first before it launches, which is a little funky, but we can see that it just has a similar API surface as our .NET API. So let's switch our Vue app to talk to the Python API. So instead of the .NET API, let's say we want to go to Python and npm run dev. And now when we've launched our Node app, our Vue app, it's now talking to our Python backend. So let's come in here to Vue, and it no longer caches on the server for 5 seconds because we're talking to Python, which is not caching. So we're getting new requests every second. Back in our .NET Aspire dashboard, did I do bad things? Let's launch the, I get the sense that maybe the .NET Aspire dashboard crashed. Let's fire it up again. There we go. Localhost 8000. There we go. Okay, let's go hit our Vue app talking to our Python backend. And now we can see here's our Vue app, and we're not logging Python. That's unexpected. So in this case, we use .NET Aspire not so much as a .NET thing, as much as just an OpenTelemetry sync, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to stop my Node app, stop my Python app, which unfortunately means I need to close it because the terminal exited quicker. And I also, in this project, have a bunch of containers for each of these. So for example, here's my Docker file for my API surface. Here's my Docker file for my Python app. And so I have a new Docker Compose file that starts the Vue app and the Python app, and also starts the two .NET apps. And so let's start that container as well. Docker compose -f, Docker compose apps.yaml up. And now Docker compose up -f. That's the way I want to do it. No? Oh, I'm in the Vue folder, that's why. There we go. Now we're going to launch the .NET API, the Vue app, the load test tool, the Python app, and all of those are now running. We can come back in here to our thing, and we'll see the load test tool. It got a timeout because the API wasn't running. Now it is. Let's come in here to the Docker Compose file, and we would like to look at Vue running on port 8082. So we'll go to localhost 8082. Now this Vue app is hooked up to the ASP.NET API. But one of the things that I did here in this Vue app in the Docker file is it's actually hosting this as static content out of Nginx. So if I come in here to the traces, we can see that here's the Vue app. Oh, that's the console load test. It moved right before I clicked. There we go. Here's the Vue app calling to Nginx, which then proxies to the API. The API got a Redis cache hit in this case and returned back into the Vue app. I love that we get OpenTelemetry from everything else as well, not just the .NET pieces. So that was really cool getting to see the OpenTelemetry, the .NET Aspire dashboard as just a generic OpenTelemetry sync. And so let's take all those containers down. And the cool part about this is all of those details are here in this folder. So you can launch each of those and get a feel for how those connect to all the things. So that was really cool, seeing a standalone dashboard with .NET Aspire. What do you think of that? Ooh, PG Web, yeah. PG Admin is pretty cool. A web-based Postgres admin tool is just really cool.
And it was really cool because another case where I really thought that Aspire was really about starting new applications. So you did a couple different things, but just even so you don't even need to be a .NET application, and you can still use it for OpenTelemetry.
Yeah,
pretty cool. So very nice.
Yeah. So that standalone dashboard, the cool part about that is we can visualize OpenTelemetry from anywhere. It doesn't need to be from a .NET project. What's really cool with the app host project is that you can run containers, you can run .NET projects, or you can run executables. And it can inject the environment variables into any of them to do really cool things. If you're using a standalone dashboard, then you don't get that service discovery, but it is really cool just to be able to visualize all of the pieces. So here's my opinions. This is definitely not official stuff, but it is cool to be able to walk through this. Where does .NET Aspire make sense? If you're starting a new project, then it probably does make sense because it gives you really sensible defaults. If you have a bunch of microservices and you want all those microservices to kind of start together and discover each other, then .NET Aspire can be great. If you're using OpenTelemetry elsewhere in your organization or in other applications, then .NET Aspire can be great because you now have that same OpenTelemetry experience while you're locally debugging too. But maybe if you've already solved that service discovery piece, you've already solved deployment, then maybe .NET Aspire doesn't make sense. And so just sticking with what you've got could be fine. But the cool part about .NET Aspire is you can use as much or as little of it as you want. So continuing on this, yes, I do want to install that, but not right now. You do need a container runtime to run a lot of the things in .NET Aspire. So if you don't have Docker Desktop or Podman running, you'll just need to be careful with the dependencies that you have. So for example, I wanted an Azure storage emulator, so I ran the the Azure storage emulator locally instead of running it inside of the container, which meant I had to kind of hack around it a little bit. So .NET Aspire, it is a really, really cool tool that brings all of this awesome .NET tech and all of this web tech into this really elegant tool that allows us to start up microservices and deploy them really easily too. This has been a lot of fun getting to show you .NET Aspire. If you're watching this later, hit me up on robrich.org and you can reach out to me on all the socials there. And for those of us here in the user group, what are your thoughts? What are your concerns? Where do you want to see .NET Aspire go further?
Well, as it relates to microservices with this, because one of the things I've always thought a use case for microservices when you have a large team and you're trying to have like less collisions of people working in the same code base and all the things like that. And I just wondered, when I saw Aspire, it seemed kind of like counterintuitive to some of that, but to me, because it was like you're working in potentially one mono repo maybe, and you could maybe split people around. But I'm just curious in your takes as someone who works with microservices, wrote books about it. What's your take on Aspire?
I agree. .NET Aspire tends to assume that it's running in a mono repo, and that's okay. But to the depth that your dependencies can be run as containers or just APIs, then you could just have those dependencies running elsewhere instead.
Yeah, it's true. I'm just so used to think of it as being like separate repos altogether and separate databases, all the different things that go, with like trying to just make sure that there's bounded context for each of the, domains that they're working in, so that there's less like interaction. And I just didn't know how well this like aligned with that. And it sounds like it can, and that's not a problem. I just what you're used to. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I prefer mono repos myself, so I haven't hit this a lot. But the technique that I've seen is you can just git clone all of the other pieces into folders with known naming conventions. And if you can do that, then you can run .NET Aspire across all of them and it launches all of them in one place. I find it a little bit easier though, if I'm working in the front end and the back end is a separate repository completely, I'm just going to pull the latest build of that back end container and just launch that microservice as a container in this .NET Aspire project, instead of having to like reach into the other repository to launch it in an interesting way that way.
That makes sense. That's good. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question, Rob. So when you were adding .NET Aspire there, you mentioned it popped up and said, hey, do you want to use this instance that you already have in place? Is there ever a scenario where you would want multiple instances running like that?
I haven't found a good instance there. The only thought I can think of is I want these logs going that way and these logs going that way. But at that point, I'm like, that's why the different tabs inside the dashboard are there. When I'm looking at traces, I can see that, it's off. But I could take a look at the console logs or the configuration associated with different projects in separate pieces. And so at that point, it's like one app host project, I would say, is often sufficient. I'll have to think about that a lot and see if I can find another mechanism where having multiple app hosts makes sense.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great question. I love it. And now I'm curious what Rich H's dumb question was. That sounds awesome.
Any
Oh,
other
I think I might
questions
have
or
found it,
comments
Rich.
for Rob?
It's
Oh, you found it?
an opinionated framework might impose a specific way to handle things like dependency injection, routing, or configuration. While this can reduce flexibility, it often results in faster development, less decision fatigue, and more consistent code bases. It's like having a detailed blueprint for building your application rather than starting from a blank slate. I agree. Sometimes the opinions can be great. Sometimes the opinions are like, yeah, but I don't want to do it that way. So opinionated frameworks can help us fall into the pit of success as long as we can accept the opinions. Oh, what does opinionated mean in this context? That is a great question. Closed solution. Let's go back to the this solution. In this case, one of the opinions is that the Postgres database is named PostgresDB, and there will be an environment variable injected in that says, here's how you connect to the PostgresDB database. And so it's not going to do anything weird. It's just going to say, hey, I need a Postgres. I must have an environment variable that exactly matches this name to be able to spin things up. Similar thing with Redis. It assumes that Redis connection string is named cache. Now, I defined that opinion here when I said this is the Postgres DB and this is cache. And so in this case, I chose to follow that convention. But the other interesting thing is, for example, this reference to the API service, the environment variable has to be services underscore API service underscore HTTPS underscore 0. Like that is the name of the environment variable, and you can't change it. So it's like, do I like that opinion? I think I can live with that one. But for example, another opinion is when you deploy with .NET Expire, it deploys the dashboard, and you can't turn that off. And I'm like, that's an opinion I don't agree with. What is Redis? Redis is a key value store. It is really good at going super fast. It's primarily in memory, but you can also store to disk as well. And it is free and open source for the version that I'm using. And so it makes caching really fast. That's a great question, Rich. I also asked Copilot what Nginx and PG Web are. Excellent. Yeah, Copilot is great. Well, excellent. If you find this video online, hit me up at robrich.org on any of the socials. And it was so much fun getting to present today at GlugNet. I'm so glad I got to share with you .NET Aspire.
Thank you, Rob. We appreciate you being here for it. All right. As far as that survey we mentioned earlier, I've dropped the link once in the chat. I'll drop it again here at the bottom of the chat. If everybody would take just a few moments sometime in the next 24 hours and leave your feedback for how we're doing about getting the word out about this event, as well as how Rob did on his presentation. We would both very much appreciate that feedback. And again, all of that is completely anonymous, so honest feedback is welcome.
And I'm really excited to learn, so I'm excited about your feedback. Definitely share your thoughts on how I did.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.